All right, 828 fam. I'm super excited to have this conversation. This is our first watch and talk. I am joined by JD, who just in my short time of being able to get to know him, like iron sharpens iron. I'm here, I'm excited. And so I'm super excited to hop into this conversation where what we did this last week is we watched I Am Not Your Negro, and this is the follow up of having the conversation. So join us, listen in, take notes. If you haven't watched the movie yet, please go back and watch it after you listen to this, because I believe that you're going to get so much out of it and actually rewatch it. And that's something that JD and I were talking about, is we have to rewatch it because it was so dense. So JD, please just introduce yourself to the 828 fan before we fully get started.
Sure. Thank you, Coach. And it's a pleasure to be here. My name is Jeff Dade. Call me JD. And for the last, I think I've lived in Puyallup in this area in Washington for about 35, 36 years. But my background is as a banker. I did that for a couple of decades. And now I'm in nonprofit, and my work is all about redistribution. My life's work is the near-term solutions for the racial wealth gap. And so I do that as a Black developer for real estate in the 150-year strong Black neighborhood of Hilltop in Tacoma, Washington. So that's how I met 828, and really just blessed to get into this space. One of the big things for me as a fan and as a practitioner in Hilltop is that in our area, there is a resurgence, there's this reclamation movement. Design the Hill is a movement created by Fab Five that out there. I don't want to do too much of a name drop kind of thing, but basically Black folks in Tacoma, Washington are really reclaiming heritage because it's a unique space for the Northwest, and that a Black man 150 years ago actually purchased the original 67 acres. And most people didn't know that. And so just knowing that, especially in context with what we're about to talk about, there are places, most places were not, made for us. This was something one of our forebears, several of our forebears were thinking about us. And that's important, and that's unique. It's something to celebrate, at least in this part of the world. So watching this, it's been in my list. I'm Not Your Negro has been in my list since I think it first came out on Netflix. And then this was an opportunity to finally watch it. A lot of times I'm a little different with, like I'll have things on my list, but if I'm like, oh, it's going to be heavy, I need to be in the right space. Because we know all the negative, right? It's not that this was like particularly positive, but I don't know that it's heavy in Blackness, the way that we just understand, like just what's always there that we just, it's kind of normal. But a man is so eloquent but yet accessible. And like Coach, like you were saying, like I already know I have to watch it. I was just looking at my notes. I was like, I got to watch it again because I've had other thoughts, What were some of your takeaways?
Well, first of all, before we even do any of that, now y'all just heard why I've been so excited to be in spaces with this man because of what you just said, what you do, your commitment, and it makes complete sense, right? Why we're here having this conversation. You said something about we were thought about.
Mm,
I can't pass by that.
yeah.
We were thought about. That's huge. It literally gives me goosebumps that somebody thought about me, and I think where we find ourselves probably so or the conversations are so probably cumbersome and suppressive is because spaces weren't created for us,
Mm,
right? They weren't created with us in mind. But
mm,
it's like no, somebody did create these spaces with you in mind. So to even know that we were a thought in somebody's mind somewhere, some shape or form, like that in and of itself should give you some type of empowerment. So I love the fact that you said that. It's like our ancestors thought about us so that way we can be doing what we're doing now. And to again give clarity over why we're even entering this series, and having a watch and talk is because we want to have conversations at the intersection of equity when it comes to society and finances, right? Because we know that finances, and especially you're talking on the real estate space, is at the root of everything. We also posted a video this month, or a couple of videos this month, talking about redlining and how the racial wealth gap, really got started. And the basis was right redlining and housing and all of that. And so I love that you're doing work to reclaim, right? To reclaim the heritage, but also really show people to have pride
Absolutely.
in their spaces, have pride, whether it be the hilltop or any other space. And so, I Am Not Your Negro was also on my list for a long time. I did not watch it prior to this for the same exact reasons, because it's like, man, when this is your existence, how much more, kind of can you take? But I do know that James Baldwin is a man of such eloquent, words and articulation that just really draws you in. And so I knew that when I would watch it, I'd had to sit and really watch it. Though I was meal prepping when I watched it, I was still able to take notes and all that, and had to rewind some stuff and think back. And it was really, I was really hit, and just really grateful for just this opportunity that forced me to watch something I already wanted to.
Right.
Um, so I think the first thing that stood out to me, um, was one of the songs. This wasn't one of the first things, but something that I really wrote down is, if you are white, you're all right. If
Hmm.
you're brown, stick around. If you're black, get back.
Right.
And we could have a whole, we could probably talk hours for that.
Right.
Especially as a milk chocolate, both of us, right? Milk chocolate, men and women, that
Mhm.
was us. We were on the Get Back crew, and that hits, and I think that also goes back to the state of, we were thought about. So it's good to know that we were thought about in a positive light, when this is what, society wants to tell you. If you black, go ahead and get back.
Right.
What are
And
your thoughts?
it was a thing. It was a thing, right? So I think one of the pieces, and it's not like, everyone that's watching this, I can't imagine that they wouldn't connect with this piece, but we know there's parts of our history that we know that's forced, right?
Mhm,
Growing up
mhm.
in school, and like, you're going to watch, you're the obligatory, fire hose on our people and those kind of things, right? Now that's history, and we need that too, right? It's just, that's all we get, right? So one of the things that really came to mind for me too is, we know that there's so many bits that, coach, as we're watching it, where you're like, you'll stop and look at it and you're like, that hasn't changed. That hasn't changed at all, right? There's certain things like that. And yet, I don't want to get it twisted either, because there's certain things, like, as far as like the overt racism. Um,
Mhm.
I remember the lady, somebody, this white woman had this sign up and said, and I remember this was just it was just so cold. I was just, in the bad way. Um, I'm like, we don't have to deal with that right now. Nigga, don't you wish you
Mm.
were white? I remember seeing that sign in the B-roll as they were going. And I was like, really? So you already know. So it wasn't one of, so what part of the thing that we're dealing with, that James brings up too, was this idea of the lack of ownership, this kind of white denial. And I love how the end, I didn't want to skip to that part yet, but the end was just so perfect for me, because I'm like, that's that shit right there. You know what I mean? Oh, I forgot if it's PG, where basically that was real. I'm like, that's the same. The Harvard professor comes out, although we have a lot better ones, I think, now. But the denial of everything at the same point of this overt, absolutely overt racism, because it's on like the news, like stuff like that. We don't have to deal with that today, because at least the
Yeah.
civil rights movement, one of the many things that it did, it made it so thus far that overt racism
Mhm.
against Black folks in America is not tolerated, for the most part, right? It's not going to be like, we know, if we go to the mall, you will not have your sign out. That's not going to happen today, right?
Mhm.
So that was a interesting counterpoint for me, just kind of seeing that, like, some
Yeah.
things haven't changed, but like, that is different. And hats off, because I'm glad I don't have to deal with that type of existence. You know what I mean?
Man, it makes me think of this this is kind of out there, but I'm known for out there. It reminds me of, a Silent but Deadly, right? That's where we're at now. Like a fart, right? It's silent but deadly. It's
Mhm.
not overt anymore,
Right. Where'd
right?
that
And now
come
people have turned, yeah, like, if you smelled it, you dealt it. Like,
from?
I
It's
don't
true
want to go
though.
too far on that one.
It's true though. That's a really apt metaphor. That's a
And
true.
that's the unfortunate piece,
Right.
is it went from being overt, oh, we don't want everybody to know that this is how I think and feel, because it's not right anymore,
Mhm.
so I'm just going to do it in ways. And here's what's crazy, is your energy precedes you.
Hmm.
And I think that's what we feel when we enter certain spaces that weren't created for us. The energy created when the space was, cultivated,
Mhm.
was built around, this ain't for you. So
Mhm.
when we go into certain spaces, whether it be in Tacoma or just other places in the world or the country, nation, I should say, we feel, ooh, right? Like this wasn't, here's your place, right?
Absolutely.
White only, colored only. Your space is here. That's what it looks like for you. But now it's not like that anymore. They just used policies to keep us in place,
Mhm.
right? So it's silent but deadly. So
Right.
we don't even, a lot of people don't even understand that where we're at and why we are where we are is based off of the policies that were the silent, like not right, not overt,
Yeah.
but the silent but deadly policies. If we implement this, that's going to force them to stay in this specific place and to think that they cannot amount to the same thing that we can. Does that
Hmm.
make sense?
Absolutely. And you're just making me think, Coach, of like, there's so many amazing lines. That's why I'm probably going to try and watch it again tonight, at least part of it. So check this out. So he talks about the profound American misunderstanding of the nature of the hatred between black and white. I had
Mm-hmm.
to stop. That like one of these moments. This hour and a half movie took definitely 2.5 hours for me to watch because of this. But the profound American misunderstanding of the nature of the hatred between black and white. And then this is my a little bit of a paraphrase on it, but for black folks, um, the root is the hatred of whites being in the way, not of the
Mm-hmm.
whites, right? Of being whites in the
Mm-hmm.
way. And then for whites, it's the terror, which focuses on, this is his words, terror, which focuses on the dread figure in his mind. The dread figure. And he said, and he said, he did say his, but just the idea of like this misunderstanding. Part of what's happening is there's some definite understandings, right? Like you hate me, you see me as, or us as taking away, um, and that's happened with different races over time, but we're like the kind of like we're the original sin, right? We're the ones that like we up jumped. There's a whole, like you said, we could talk for months on all this, right? But this idea of just what we what we think is happening is really different. And there's not one of
Mm-hmm.
the big things for me that was iterated, there are a lot of different iterations of this, was the lack of white ownership, right?
Mm-hmm.
And not even like black folks are coming like, hey, you need to own up to this. It's just more like it's so inconvenient to, and it's so much better to be in the fantasy of that doesn't acknowledge oppression at all. So it's like a non-starter. So we're having
Mm-hmm.
these like jacked up feelings like, you know what, it's such a non-starter, I guess we have to wait for them to die. How horrible is that? That's not what we want to do, right?
Yeah. So here's what's interesting too is I think that's why policies are so important to look at because even when the implementers die, the policy's still there.
Absolutely.
And the thing that sucks is that there are people who are still alive now that were kids during that time,
Mm,
right? Like, and they were raised by people who implemented these policies, right? So, regardless of where you look, from the school system to the financial system to the banking system, however you want to break these things down, they all of the systems that we're moving through were not created for us to succeed. And so one thing that I'm really actually studying in my doctoral, like to be an expert in this, is capital.
mhm.
Really understanding different forms of human capital and community cultural wealth. And what does that look like for people who look like us, Black, Brown, Indigenous people, to be able to leverage in order to succeed within suppressive systems?
Mhm.
So when you think about it, we need these things in order for us to navigate these policies that weren't created for us. And we also need people like yourself and other um, intentional allies, for lack of better words, right now, to be able to remove those barriers, right? You cannot be a silent ally, right? This is where it comes into play is you have to take ownership over this might not have been me, but I have the ability to remove this barrier. If I'm in position, I need to use my positionality to remove this barrier because that's what equity is, right? Right, removing the barriers so that other people can come in and get what they're supposed to get. And so one of the things that he talked about that really stuck out to me was, and it was just towards the end, but he said, I don't know if such and such, right? I don't know if this white man hates me. I don't know that, right? Like I can't look at him and just automatically know that. But the policies show me they do.
Mhm.
And I was like,
It was good. And I think that was on the show, wasn't
Mm-hmm.
it? That was
Mm-hmm.
part of his answer, because the doctor's like, he was more like, why does it have to be so bitter? Why does it always have to come back to race? How convenient,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of the thing. One of a dream that I have, and I think, and maybe someone's done this, I just haven't seen it, but I feel like every Black American, uh, or a Black person in America, because you don't have to be American actually, but I feel like there's like 20 points that we all need, like we need to memorize or something, like the kind of how I used to have like the green book, right? We need to
Yeah.
have this some other kind of book that's like, okay, when they deny, so because there's always just like this anatomy of the conversation, right? That
Mm-hmm.
you could really like, there's certain things that come out, and then
Yeah.
I forgot what it was, but one of the things I remember in having conversation with allies or people who want to engage, which are not always allies, because some people want to tell you about yourself, they think they do, but things like, well, what about personal responsibility? Like whenever I hear this, I'm like, oh, okay, we're going to white fragility. Okay, cool. So then he's going to do this. You know what I mean? Or she. But there's you know what I'm talking about? Like there's this kind of like meter to these kind of conversations that happens where if they're saying this, it's going to go to these three things. And even if you're I'm someone like, I'm always thinking like, do I engage? Is it worth my time? Right, those kind of things, right? But then also when it's time, I think there's like a good handful of things that we need to have developed in our pocket, like ready. Does that make sense? Does that resonate at all?
It makes 100% sense because it's like, I mean, as a coach, it's like a playbook. Okay, if they go zone, this is what we're gonna do. If
Mm-hmm.
they hit a 2-3, we're gonna make sure we get in the gaps, right? Because I think that sure, you could play your best defense, but I think a great offense wins games, right? So we need to get on offense, right? Like, how do we attack? How do we get buckets? How do we win? How do we execute, right? Regardless of what defense, what press, whatever it is that they throw at us, we know that we have the tools within our system to be able to execute and get a bucket. That's how I like to play the game, right? And so you said something about ownership, and I wonder, is there ownership fatigue?
Mm-hmm.
Do our white counterparts have ownership fatigue? And the reason why I say this is, and I say it that way, is how is it that a race that was so pressed to take ownership of us doesn't have the energy left to take ownership of their own, right? Like now you don't have any space left, the capacity to take ownership over what you've done. But
Right.
you want to take ownership over us as a human race, but now you don't want to take ownership over what your wrongdoings. And I think that in and of itself is a part of the problem. But then there are those who have the ability to stand up and say, regardless of whatever fatigue I may have, regardless of um, anything capacity life wise, I see that there are issues, and I'm going to stand in the gap and make sure that I'm able to do what I can in order to make space, right, for others. And that ownership really is responsibility, right? I'm going to take responsibility, right?
Right.
I'm going to go from taking ownership of another human, right, to taking responsibility over my actions, whether they were mine or somebody who looked like me, or a policy that's in place to keep you from advancing. So I haven't looked into much to like ownership fatigue, but that's something that just kind of popped up, is like, you'd rather take destructive ownership, but you don't want to take constructive ownership.
Right, because there's this cognitive dissonance, right? Where
Oh, 100%.
even he said does it so well. Like I don't want to keep doing quotes, and I know we're probably getting close to end time, but what you said, Coach, it just made me think, because I wrote this because it was so well said, and it's speaking to exactly what you're saying, right? Where even as an ally, I think what happens with our white counterparts, and even allies or folks that are potential allies, where I absolutely agree with the fatigue, because part of the thing with it is that it's left field. It shouldn't be left field,
Yeah.
right? And so it's so hard to be like, yes, my ancestors did this to your ancestors, but like, what's that with me? I mean, even we know, like you're looking at capital, even with financial behaviors, when we throw, researchers let us know, for humans, when you throw yourself into the future, it's super abstract, right? So when you're talking about like, what are you going to be doing in X decades with your 401k? Like, I don't know that, man. Like that's this other Jeff. I don't even know him. He's got more gray hair, I think, right?
Yeah.
But it's super abstract for humans to do that. And so imagine doing that on the scale of 400 years worth of oppression and harm. That doesn't feel like me because I didn't do it, right? Racism doesn't exist, right? And I'm being facetious because I know that person exists out there too, but
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
American prosperity has cost willing people there, or wait, has cost, dang, that's not the one. The people who have, I can tell that my chicken scratch, I was just going like crazy. The people who have received the most spectacular benefits of this arrangement can neither understand them nor do them. Above all, I think I didn't write that down right. Above all, they cannot imagine, this is what I was trying to get at. They cannot imagine the price paid by their victims or subjects for this way of life. So they cannot afford to know why the victims have revolted. This is the formula for a nation working on decline. So that whole idea, what he's talking about, and then one of my favorite scenes, it was so well done. Actually, I was talking to young brother Valentine. Shout out if Valentine's watching this. That helped us for the very first Black Puyallup celebration that we had this last weekend. And he's a filmmaker from California. And we were just talking about this movie because I told him I was going to be with 828 and with you, Coach. And we were talking about this scene towards the end, and it shows this movie. I think it's called like The Picnic or something like that. I'm not familiar with the movie, but it shows all these kind of young people, all white, and a lot of them on this like bank of like the river or something. And they're like doing cartwheels, and it's like this amazing fun time. And what the narrator was doing was reading, James' counter to this, right? The idea of this fantasy. Like we really have to your point, really acknowledge that there is this cognitive dissonance. There's a separation from reality that our counterparts that do not have to deal with it. Like when I go to the grocery store tonight, I have to, and you have to. We know there's a certain amount of like armor you're gonna put on for the microaggressions. I don't know if this is gonna happen. It's not that I have a chip on my shoulder, but I don't, because of the nature of our country, I don't know if Janet is having a bad day or if the thing is happening. I don't know. I don't get to know. And she's allowed to do it because I'm Black, apparently, right? I don't agree with this, but you know what I mean? So everybody Black gets what I'm saying because it's just life, right? But yeah, this cognitive dissonance, that fantasy thing, that was like the biggest, like, not even a revelation. It was just more this acknowledgement. Like when you hear the gospel truth and you're like, yes, I've always felt that, I've never articulated, like that was it. That's what that was from.
I think that feeling, right? There's a feeling that we know, right? You said Black people, we know, right? And I think when James was talking about when he was living overseas, that he didn't really catch that feeling too much. And I think this is what made his perspective so different, because he was in spaces where that natural feeling that we have and we could describe here in America, he didn't feel when he was overseas. And I remember being in Europe a couple months ago. I took like a 3-week vacation to Europe in Morocco. And primarily when I was in Europe, I remember only missing not necessarily America and not really the food, but I missed Black culture.
Right.
Like, and I was like, yo, Black culture is American culture. Like you cannot find American Black culture in Africa. It ain't like, it's not the same. You can't find it in Europe. It's not, you can't find it in all these other, because it's right, like it's here. And so I think the other part of that though is also these feelings that we experience here that you don't necessarily experience or feel anywhere else. There's a lot of research and documentaries over people who go, walk around in other spaces in other countries, and they're like, do you guys, have racism? They're like, no, more so classism. Right. So they have isms. It just doesn't hit the same way it does for us here. And in one of the things that I wrote down is James said that the root of the Black man's hatred is wanting the white man out of his way and his children's way.
Yeah.
Like, that hit, right? That's that anger. Just move. Just allow me to do what I was born to do. Allow me to just be without you being. There's enough, right? We all have enough suppressors We all have enough. There's just life just in general. And now you want to stand in my way from me being able to just provide for my family? And when you don't understand that, right? I think that's what it is you don't understand that you are a symbol of what is blocking me from getting what I deserve. And that's what hurts. So when I look at you, it's hard for me to look at you and not feel some type of way
Mm-hmm.
because you represent all that is suppressed me in my history. And then when you think about, what Malcolm, Dr. ML, not Malcolm, Dr. MLK said, Martin,
Mm-hmm.
he said to choose to be nonviolent and know you will receive violence and not retaliate.
Right.
That hit. Like that hit because it's as we're trying to, like you just described, going to the store, that you can't retaliate and you're going to receive violence. I don't care whether it's overt or micro. An aggression is an aggression. And death by 1,000 cuts. It doesn't matter,
Absolutely.
right? Because you still know that you can't. In the fact that she quote unquote can, that's the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we're just like, let me just go get some groceries so I can feed my family and go home. I'm not even trying to.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that piece that I think is just part of the fact that just leaves a bad taste in our mouth. That it's 2022, and yet we still have to, engage, and we still have to have these kind of conversations because some people just don't even want to accept that there's an ignorance here,
Yeah,
and
it's
it's
like
time for
tradition
us
at this
to,
point, right? For a lot of people, right? It's like
yeah.
traditional. It's to like you don't. I wonder if some people even know why. Like when you see me, when they see us, over there just trying to get some bread or whatever, right? Like it's something like I am the object of
Yeah.
whatever. He said, white people are astounded by Birmingham. Black people are not, right? Just these little things. It's just so simple, right? But there's these things just like the only difference right now, thank goodness for Black Lives Matter, we've known nothing, all these things for Black folks, it hasn't been, these aren't like revelations. This is the norm. And this isn't to like, not asking for pity, like no, screw your pity. Like it's not about that, it's about justice and it's about equity. But part of the thing is like, oh my gosh, these things are happening. It's because of phones, right? Like these are technology got us to the point where like you were able to see in 2018 and 17 and 16 and today that it
Mm-hmm.
happened today. This event in Louisiana, in Portland, in Alabama, in Maryland. You know what I'm saying? Where we know that this is the case, but I think
Yeah.
for similar to what like to your point with MLK, where he had to, and I know so many people turn their nose up because it's hard for us to fathom like taking the abuse that they did. But
Mm-hmm.
Black folks of the day, they knew that if you have the normal human response that you have, it plays into what they've already established about us, this narrative about us. So we have to be so polarized, so polar over here to accept all this that you can't deny what you see. We're going to do it in this town, in this state, in this state, in this state, in this state. Do you see us? Because they didn't have a phone, right? And then for this generation, we had to use the phones. Like, all right, you
Yeah.
see me. I saw somebody on a YouTube video, and they're like, okay, there's a cop up here. I'm going to record this. He's going to pull me over. They weren't doing anything, right? He's going to pull me over. And they drove up, and sure enough, and they just went through the whole thing. It's like because they get to, and it's more this is the silent but deadly. I'm allowed to do certain things. Don't get me
And
started. I know we
that's
got to finish.
no, you're good because that's power, right? And that's where use your power, right? Use your positionality to be able to dismantle, right? Like that's pretty much it because the system is working the way that it was created to, period. It's doing its job. That's where the policies come into play. The policies were put in play in order for these practices to do exactly what it's doing. So the system is working. It's working for those it's supposed to work for.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. So we can't necessarily be mad at the system for doing what it's supposed to be doing. I think if we take that energy to dismantle, right, that system and get with those other people who are in positions to be able to help us dismantle, to rebuild, right? It's burn it down at this point, right? Because it's been working for how many years, right? 400 plus years. It's been working in this way in their favor. Their favor is unequal. That's where we're fighting for equality, right? And so, I think that when you said some people may not even know, a lot of people don't even understand trauma, the
Mm-hmm.
root of trauma, and the fact that trauma can be passed down, right? Like trauma can be passed down through our genes, through in us. So I would imagine if, my great, probably about four generations ago, were slave owners, there's some trauma and some trauma and some trauma, right? That people are still living with that trauma from their greats, and then they were still raised within this specific area. James said this, that segregation increases ignorance. So if I was raised in this specific way, I was raised to think this way. I was raised, right? Because if ignorance is bliss, then
Mm-hmm.
I enjoyed that. I was in that space. I don't see anything wrong with whatever's going on. I'm good now. You just should do what I did. Work hard. Pull up by your bootstraps. So now all these, cliches start to get thrown around, and now you don't understand what's going on because you stayed segregated. You stayed in this specific space and you never worked through the trauma that was created, right? And that was passed down through and through. And so now you're inflicting more trauma because you didn't, right, work on it, and neither did your forefathers. And so our ancestors is beefing, and you don't even get it. So that energy is going to precede you when you see me. And I have to be the one that chooses to be nonviolent because you have the right to react however you want to. And if I step out of line, it's a wrap for me.
Right. I agree with you, Coach. I think that white denial is absolutely a response to trauma. You know what I mean? It's this bubble, and there's other ways that humans can do this, but for America, this is truly specific. You know what I mean? Where you have so many. I've met good people, like folks I would
Mm-hmm.
consider just nice people. I wouldn't say that they're like intentionally racist. Maybe I could say stuff like that, but like
Mm-hmm.
they can't fathom. It's just this whole kind of left field like dissonance of
Yeah.
it. It's really real, and part of what I will say is that thank goodness that we are in this reckoning space, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
still so much to dig into this, but it's part of um, the ownership piece really was um, what I left. That was like the taste I left with James, or with this rather, with this particular documentary. And I don't know what the answer is. I know I'm going to continue to work on it because I'm in that space, and I know that I need help, and I know we need to link up. We have to with fellow champions, seekers. You know what I mean? But I do believe not even just believe, but for things to work, we need white folks to come to the table. We do, right? If we're gonna have, if you're gonna have any relationship, you need both folks. So part of the thing is, and I know they're so scared. What's CRT? Like that's a whole other conversation, right? But part of the deal
Mm-hmm.
with critical race theory, what are they doing? They're like, we don't want our kids to hate themselves. Like,
Mm-hmm.
right? You
Yep.
already know what the
Yeah.
deal is, right? But part of the thing is like no, we're not even coming for you. And I love how you brought that up. Just the whole idea that I don't hate you. There's not even hatred
Mm-hmm.
for you. It's like I just wish you would get out the way so that we can have a good life also. When we're not, so like in my space, right? We talk about back with this equity, when you're in financial space, equity is value, right? Typically, like in a homeowner situation, if you're doing equities, it's this,
Yeah.
iterations of value, right? So if my white counterparts and others, right? Part of the big difference for us is that when my great grandfather and grandfather came back from the war, they magically did not get the GI Bill, right? They got
Mm-hmm.
stuck through redlining. They got stuck with steering, where you do go to they have a great documentary of Harold Moss, former mayor, first Black mayor in Tacoma, rest in peace. That he was talking about his experience coming back from the war and how they're trying like, hey, I pay my bills, I do all this different, right? But they're like, no, you're going to want to live over here. No, I want to live right here, right? So even if you're outside the red line space, you're getting steered because, well, we don't want you here, right? So all these different pieces, but the difference is that my grandparents could not get a GI Bill. My grandparents were barred from starting the situation, and yours were not. It's not that we're different. It's not that there's no lazy. They did a great job in the documentary talking about that stereotype too. It was amazing. Like he was actually literally in bed with the nightcap, right? Mm-hmm. But the idea that you got to start back in the day with property that was in the like 4 digits, right? Mm-hmm. And so even when we are getting the space to actually purchase homes, even if it's done en masse, we're talking, 400,000, not 4 digits, right? So even when you're finally able to get in, and I don't want to do it like a head start, but part of what we're doing today is we're just recreating the opportunity for Black folks that was not allowed in the 1940s and before, right? Getting property, let it build, get some people some education, put together, have more and more people have access to the same thing. Turns out that's the engine of the world, financial engine of the world today, right? Just having these opportunities over time. That's what we're fighting for, to do that. So it's going to be generations before we get through that.
Yeah. Thank you so much for tying that right all back as we start to close, tying that back into it, right? Really being able to look at how the world, the country, nation that we live in, it was built a specific way to do exactly what it's doing. Our mission is to create a new system, right? Is to dismantle this, to create a system that has I want to say it this way. If equity is something that anybody in the real estate realm, anybody in business wants equity, we want cash flow, we want value. Mm-hmm. If you as a white person, right, for lack of better terms, right, however you want to say it, if you understand equity from that side, from the financial piece, then you have to understand that that's all we're trying to achieve also, right? If you understand that equity is value, then see it that way. Because if not, your current behavior is telling me that I am not worthy of that value. Simply put, right? If equity is value, then make sure your behavior is aligned with showing me that I'm also worthy of having value. And at every level, that looks different, right? Every person has a different level of privilege to be able to give access to that value. Or if your behavior is going to continue to align with showing me I'm not worthy of having that value, that's a personal problem, because we're coming regardless. The system is being broken regardless. We are rebuilding it regardless, because we are beast, right? Like we are hungry, we are talented, we are powerful, we are magical, we are worthy regardless of what you and the system thinks. You had to build a system to try to restrain us? Come on. And yet still I rise, right? And so that for me is the thing. If equity is value, then as allies, right, help us create a system that shows us we too are worthy of being able to access that value, right? And I think that is really, what it comes down to. And so, JD, in some final words, why would you recommend anybody to watch this movie and spend some time engaging in it?
I would say I Am Not Your Negro does a really good job to me of kind of naming and lifting up this ownership piece. One of the things that really is an enemy of this conversation, of the kind of interface, the like good engagement between Black folks and white folks, is this, we have the rugged individual mythology and bootstrappers, and this whole idea that, well, if you just work harder, then you'll get here. Mm-hmm. And it's these kind of talking about different types of privilege and how they manifest in this socio-financial space. It's in our case in America, you cannot, and it's been said many, many different ways, much better than what I'm going to say right now, but you cannot separate race and class in America. Our history, it is indelibly, it is just like it's in the earth, right? Mm-hmm. Our blood, bone, skill of our ancestors. It speaks to this, right? So I think that people should watch it, just really to get, I pray folks watch it too. And you're going to, if you get into it and you're open and you're interested, you're going to watch it again because it's just too much. It's just this, and not like it's dense, but not in a bad way. Like it's accessible, but to really start kind of lifting out this conversation about like, man, we're really living in two different worlds, aren't we? This idea of there's certain folks, we understand what's happening and how we're, when you arrive, when you are successful, that's you, because you're helping the rest of your crew, your family too, and that's part of our survival. But our white counterparts don't have to deal with that kind of piece necessarily, right? But this idea of how privilege manifests in the United States and this lack of ownership and this cognitive dissonance, that was not very concise, but that's why I think folks should watch it, just to kind of lift that out and just understand we really see it differently. And until we start having this kind of engagement in the middle, and even I'll say for Black folks too, I think maybe for us, I think for me, one of the things I learned is maybe the way I'm going to come at like potential allies, maybe that might look a little bit different, because I'm just understanding more that like this is damn left field for, so you know what I mean? I just got a new understanding of like how, like if you just, I never learned art and you're talking about this, talking about these colors, and I just don't know what you mean, the color theory, it's like that kind of conversation. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think the thing that we often get tired of is being the patient ones, being the teachers, being the empaths,
You're right.
being the
You're right.
right. And so to that point, get your rest, right? Put your energy towards being your best self, whatever that looks like. We know that we have to be able to work twice as hard to have half as much, but I don't think I'm not working twice as hard to have half as much anymore. Half as much ain't good enough for me. My ancestors didn't do all they did for me to get to this space with all these resources and all these gifts that God gave me for me to have half as much. I'm no longer, you know what I'm saying, trying to run away a race against somebody who had a 400-year head start. What do I look like? I'm not fooling with you.
Come on.
I'm in my own lane. You know what I'm saying? Living out my purpose. And that's my thought process. And that's my empowerment to everybody else's. We don't have to work twice as hard to have half as much anymore. Right. And surround yourself with a village of people who will empower you. Don't give up too soon. You know what I'm saying? Don't tap out. Allow yourself to get re-energized, right? Figure out what that means. What does happiness look like for you? Right? What does engagement look like for you? When you need to step back, step back. When you're ready to dive in, dive in. And this is why you have a team. When you need a sub, get you a sub. And that for me, I think is what it is we're not in this alone. That's the biggest part. Community is at the root of our culture. Joy is at the root of our culture. Love, food, family, all those things. So let's hold tight, onto that, and do what we have to do to continue, to get what we deserve to have.
Sure.
So that's kind of my thought process. Go ahead.
One last thing, Coach, really, because you make it this excellent point. There's a spectrum, right? I'm so glad you said what you said, because I'm in a space where I'm putting myself in harm's way to do this work.
Mhm.
So I'm building bridges, but that's not everybody. And I don't mean we need, what do you say? We have a great elder out here, Lao Pasem, and he has a saying for this, but basically we need the spectrum, right? So everybody doesn't need to be doing what matter of fact, probably most people don't need to do what I'm doing, right? For whatever reason, part of my life's work is to build this bridge and to try. And so the way I'm thinking about these things is like, how do I engage folks? I think you're almost there. I'm not going to engage with, but I'm gonna go this way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
everybody else,
Yeah.
like that's not for everybody. For sure.
Yeah.
Go get yours. Go do it.
Yeah.
Screw that noise. Like just
Yeah.
go figure it out. And then I just really want to, last words from me, what you said about tribing up, like that's it. I don't know how else to, if for everyone that's listening to watch this, if you're not already doing it, and it can be hard, I'll be the first one to say, find your people, man. Find the folks that are going to build you and that you want to build with, that you want to invest in, and socially even, right? And yeah, because you don't have to do it alone. It is a great point.
Yeah. No, and that's social capital. We need social capital to be able to navigate this system. You were not supposed to go at this alone. So, and that is, allies included. People who look like you and people who don't look like you. And not everybody deserves all of you, right? So tread carefully, use discretion, use discernment, those types of things. But understand that it takes a village.
Yeah.
That saying is a saying for a reason. It not only just takes a village to raise a child, but it also takes a village, I believe, to raise healthy adults, right? At the same time, who are, it takes a village to even build equitable systems, right?
Mm.
We need people to be able to do this work, right? We need people to be able to live with, and iron sharpens iron. So before we go, can you show people your shirt, please?
Oh,
Just so they can read that, because that is if you
can you
step
see
back
it?
just a
I
little
can't see
bit.
myself.
You step back a little bit, right there. Yes. I love it. I love it. I love it. Yes, that is good.
Awesome.
JD, thank you for that.
Yeah, of course.
Um, Man, well, we planned on talking for a little bit less than this, but I should have known that we weren't, it wasn't over, right? It wasn't over because I think it was a necessary conversation. And so I hope that this um, made you feel engaged, made you feel empowered, made you think. I hope that there was some thought provoking statements by us and by the people that we quoted. I hope that you go back and watch the movie. I hope that you tell other people to watch the movie. I hope that you continue to celebrate Black History beyond
Right.
right February. It is not just a
Let's do this
February
every
thing.
month.
So I hope that yes, it's an everyday thing. This Black excellence is 365, 24/7. Don't get it twisted. So I hope that you continue to embrace and embody that, and learn that much more about American history, because it's our history and that's Black history. So thank you so much, JD, for being here and blessing us with your presence. This is not
Having
the
me.
last, because you are a gem. So you in here. We're making it happen. So thank you,
More hell.
828 fam. Truly appreciate y'all. Coach Reese, JD, we're out. Thank you.